Hello everyone. In this short video, let me give a brief account of the transition from modernity to postmodernity. I'll be concentrating much upon the philosophical aspects or the philosophical dimensions on modernity and postmodernity. The terms modern and modernity, in fact, have a long history of their own. The philosophy of modernism perhaps begins or have its origins in the rise of science and technology. And before that, the term modern stands for a kind of a rebellious spirit, or we can say something that would like to have a break away from what is past. Now, the philosophers of the modern period, they came up with the belief that the universe is rational and the entire universe works upon certain universal laws. And the philosophers of the late Renaissance movement came up with a great assumption or a belief that knowledge is accessible, knowledge is valuable, but also knowledge is a highly political instrument. An interesting feature of modern philosophy is that it is characterized by a paradox. By paradox, I mean objectivity born out of subjectivity. That is, the objectivity of or the arrogance of knowledge coupled with the humility of critical self-examination. Thus, one can say that the story of modern philosophy is not only the story of science and technology, but also the story of power and politics. Modern philosophy is characterized by two great movements. One is the Renaissance movement, and the other one is the Enlightenment movement. And the two prominent figures that appear in this movements are René Descartes, the father of modern Western philosophy, and Immanuel Kant, the great German thinker who represents the culmination of Enlightenment. First, the Renaissance movement. The Renaissance movement is endowed with a lot of characteristics. For example, they valued the dignity of man. They believed in the possibilities of human reason. And they were really hoping for a new scientific age. And the spirit of humanism was yet another hallmark of modern philosophy. Because we all know the pre-modern times were characterized more with religion rather than philosophy. So there was more of faith and less of reason, more of dogmatism rather than the spirit of critical examination or the spirit of individualism. So these were in fact lacking during the modern period. So when there came a transition from the pre-modern to the modern period, this modern period is endowed with all these characteristics of we can say the scientific tempo of objectivity, again critical examination, individualism, the dignity of man, all these things. The idea of a self-defining subject is yet another highlight of the modern philosophy, or we owe very much to René Descartes for the very idea of a self-defining subject, the cogito and all that. Modern philosophy is also characterized by yet another moment. This is the moment of Enlightenment. Enlightenment thinkers believed very much in progress. Freedom was the very watchword of the Enlightenment period. They also gave much importance to the dignity of the human person and also the rights of human beings. And a very important slogan comes to our mind whenever we discuss the Enlightenment movement, and that is the very famous quote of Immanuel Kant. I quote, "Transition from immaturity and dependence to the spirit of freedom and autonomy and the ability to use one's understanding without any guidance from another." So this shall be the motto of Enlightenment period, or this is what is expected out of Enlightenment according to the great German thinker Kant. Though Enlightenment slogans or the project of Enlightenment was received by many, it is not that there were not any criticisms. Of course, critics were many. So they believed that they feared that the Enlightenment thinkers are atheists and they are the corruptors of the society. It is true that the Enlightenment thinkers, they valued the onslaught on dogma and authority, because during the pre-modern times, as I have already explained, that there were much of dogma, there were much of authoritarianism, maybe in terms of religion, but Enlightenment, the very project of Enlightenment was to how to make ourselves free from the clutches of those kinds of dogma or authoritarianism or blind faith, etc. But there is an unsidedness in the quickening tide of modernization that is hoped by the Enlightenment thinkers. Rousseau was perhaps critical of the direction of the civilization of modernity, and he could see that there exists a lot of great political and economic inequalities in the society. So he raised concern over the universalizing tendencies of the Enlightenment period. Similarly, Herder was yet another thinker who said that there exists a lot of cultural differences in the society apart from the political and economic inequalities. So these cultural differences may be alternative universalizing tendencies of the Enlightenment. Thus, we can see that though the Enlightenment thinkers came up with a lot of hope, there were also a lot of critics who were a little bit skeptic regarding the very project or the very aim of this Enlightenment thinkers, to be more specific, and maybe the very project of modernity itself. Now moving on to postmodernity. What is actually the term postmodern and postmodernity? By the way, I would like to say why do we have terms like modernism and modernity, and also postmodernism and postmodernity. Modernism more or less is used in the context of cultural or artistic discussions, whereas modernity is used more in the context of politics, law, sciences, etc. Similar is the case with postmodernism and postmodernity. So what is this post in this postmodern? That is the very fundamental question. Postmodernism, we can say, is a continuation as well as a break away from what we call modernism. Something that comes after, postmodernism is something that comes after modernism. Similarly, postmodernism is something that disrupts the very flow of modernism. We can say that is without modernism, perhaps there is no postmodernism. But when we read from another angle, it's very clear that postmodernism is very well a break away from what we call modernism. It is true that modernity has got a lot of achievements, perhaps in the industrial production, scientific and technological advancements, specialization, standardization, mass media, communication, and in every field. The period of modern modernism, or we can say the modern age, has come up with a lot of achievements. But modernism has also got a lot of ambivalent features. For example, differentiation is a key feature of modernism. Today, we have differentiation of labor, but what is the outcome of it? Too much of differentiation may cause some sort of an uneasiness to manage everything. Again, rationalization. Too much of rationalization, that is a characteristic of the modern age, may crush eventually the human spirit. Again, urbanism. Urbanism may eventually lead to a society of strangers. So from the very beginning itself, it is observed that, from the very beginnings of postmodernism or postmodernity, there exists a lot of caution and concern. And perhaps postmodernity or postmodernism is a mixed blessing, or modernity we can say is a mixed blessing. It has got a lot of advantages. At the same time, there are also a lot of concerns regarding many of the outcomes of modernity or modern period. According to Habermas, modernity is an unfinished project. So modernity, of course, is a project, but modernity is not a finished project. It remains as an unfinished project. So we need something else, perhaps postmodernism, to complete that project. Another great philosopher, Lyotard, he would like to say that postmodernity is an incredulity towards meta-narratives. Now, what's a meta-narrative and all that? We will see. Now, what is exactly the context for the rise of postmodernism, or what is the genealogy of postmodernism? Now, let us see the genealogy of postmodernism. There are, in fact, 4 distinct but interrelated contexts for the origins of postmodernism. Number 1, postmodernists are critical of the universal pretensions of science and the instrumental objectifying masculinist rationality. They reject the dialectical accounts of the advance of reason that's put forward by Hegel and Marx. And another interrelated context that comes along with it is the critique of the subject, that is argued by, or that comes mainly from Nietzsche, Heidegger, structuralists, and the post-structuralists. Foucault's Nietzschean genealogy traces knowledge, truth, and the subject to constellations of power. According to Foucault, knowledge, truth, and perhaps the subject, everything goes beyond the reach of a divisive reason. Derrida's contribution also must be mentioned here. Derrida's notion of deconstruction and his critique of logocentrism. All this prepare the ground for the beginnings of postmodernism. Now, the second thing can be the history of the Europe and the Western world. So we know the history of the world during the period of modernity was the shocking, destructive world wars. The rise of fascism in Germany is yet another feature. The shocking Nazi genocide that killed 6 million Jews was yet another black mark in the history of the modern times. And a very dangerous modern affair was the Holocaust. So all these make us think an important question: is modernity really an achievement? Because we have already seen modernity comes with the very watchword of reason, with the very watchword of freedom. So the modern philosophers, or the philosophers of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, they believed that reason could solve the problems of the human beings, and modernity could provide or could liberate man from the clutches of the religious authoritarianism. So it is true that modernity could make a lot of achievements in the field of science, technology, and all that. There is no doubt. But history also reveals another side. So it really makes us think, is modernity, or was modernity really an achievement? Now the third one that comes here is the fate of Marxism. The frequent target of criticism for the critics of modernism is Marxism. The dangers of the totalizing theories is one important aspect here. Now, the postmodernists were also skeptic about the unfounded pretensions of history. Again, the Stalinist degeneration to communism, Marxism's apparent failure, is taken as the final proof of the bankruptcy of the Enlightenment project. Now, moving on to the fourth context of the rise of postmodernism, which is also an interrelated context to what all we have seen above, that is the development in art and theory. Modernism is identified with artistic or literary modernism. Avant-garde rebels against the conventional forms of art is the key factor here. When the revolutionary ambitions of surrealists were unfulfilled, then Adorno and Walter Benjamin, they came to emancipate modern art. But Walter Benjamin, he says that the mechanical reproduction of art perhaps devalues the very aura of art itself. So postmodernism rejects any distinction between high and low culture, between art and entertainment. So all these four distinct but interrelated contexts, in fact, keeps the stage ready for the beginning of postmodernism. Again, another important feature that we can find here is if there are totalizing tendencies, universalizing tendencies, or predefined certain aspects in modernism, when we come to postmodernism, there is the mood of uncertainty. And this is not only the feature of art, but even in science, we can see the mood of uncertainty. Einstein's relativity theory and quantum mechanics, so it undermined the notions of absolute space and time. Then the realist interpretations of science were under attack by Thomas Kuhn and Paul Feyerabend, two great philosophers of science. In art, chance, uncertainty, and random choices of the performer were given much importance. Then artistic and scientific tendencies contributed to the mode of uncertainty. So all these really kept open the doors to non-Western cultures and worldviews. And perhaps one can say that postmodernism is always looking for alternative tendencies, how to respect the voice of the other. And all these gives way to the rise of postmodernism. Now, I would like to say more about why Habermas said that modernism is an unfinished project, and why Lyotard observed that postmodernity is an incredulity to meta-narratives. So these will be explained in the next video. Thank you.